Get ready because today we're going to be diving into D.H. Lawrence's Fantasia of the Unconscious.
Oh, yeah.
It's a challenging read to say the least, but
It is.
I think that you'll be surprised by how relevant some of his ideas are even today.
Yeah.
And we're going to be focusing mostly on the preface of the first 3 chapters today.
Okay.
And that's where Lawrence really lays out his perspective on human consciousness and motivation and all that stuff.
Yeah, and where he kind of really goes after objective science and conventional psychoanalysis.
Right off the bat, he throws down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
He says that both of those things miss the mark when it comes to truly understanding what it means to be alive.
Yeah,
So I'm curious to get your take on this because
Okay.
it's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, well, it is a bold statement, and I think what's interesting is that he's not anti-science.
Okay.
He's arguing for what he calls subjective science,
Oh.
which is a way of knowing that values intuition and lived experience as much as it does data and observation.
So instead of just looking at the physical mechanisms of the brain,
Right.
he's saying we need to consider the intangible energies that might be driving our thoughts and feelings.
Exactly, and this is where his concept of a lost pagan science kind of comes in.
Okay.
He believed that ancient civilizations had a much deeper understanding of life
Yeah.
as this kind of flow of living energy,
Right.
which he felt modern science had neglected in its pursuit of purely material explanations.
Okay, so let's unpack this pagan science idea for a second, because
Yeah.
it's pretty central to his thinking.
It is, yeah.
He suggests that symbols and myths from these ancient cultures might hold clues to this forgotten knowledge.
Yeah.
He even goes so far as to say there was this pre-flood world
Right.
with a universal science that was lost due to cataclysmic events.
Yeah, now whether or not we buy into that or, the historical accuracy of his claims, I think the idea itself is really intriguing.
Yeah.
That there's this whole dimension of reality we've lost touch with.
It makes you wonder if maybe modern science, with its emphasis on objectivity and detachment, has created this kind of blind spot,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a provocative thought for sure.
preventing us from fully grasping the mysteries of life.
And it leads us to really question some assumptions about how we understand ourselves in the universe.
And Lawrence doesn't stop there. He also takes aim at Freud,
He does.
specifically his emphasis on sex as the primary motivator of human behavior.
Right. And while he acknowledges the importance of sexuality, I think he challenges the idea that it's the sole driving force behind everything we do.
So if not sex, then
Yeah.
what is it? What's going on?
Well, according to Lawrence, there's this other more fundamental impulse at play.
Okay.
And he calls it a creative or religious impulse.
Okay, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a compelling idea.
Yeah. He argues that this creative impulse is about more than just procreation or survival. It's about this desire to bring something beautiful and meaningful into the world.
Right. It reminds me of something that I was reading recently about the importance of beauty and awe in human experience.
Yes,
It seems like he's tapping into that.
absolutely. And this kind of leads us into one of his most fascinating and I think also controversial ideas.
Okay.
This concept of the solar plexus as a center of consciousness.
Oh, boy.
Now, before you think that this is just some new age mumbo jumbo, remember he's talking about a real physical nerve center
Right.
located in the abdomen behind the stomach.
He goes into detail about this.
Right? He describes it anatomically.
And he imbues it with this really profound significance.
Yeah.
Claiming it's the primary seat of our dynamic consciousness.
Where that fundamental knowledge I kind of resides.
Right?
It's like he's saying that our sense of self, our awareness of being a separate individual.
Originates not in the brain, but in this network of nerves and ganglia deep within our bodies.
It's a pretty radical idea, right?
It is, and it doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
He introduces this other nerve center, the lumbar ganglion,
Okay.
which he says is the seat of individual identity,
Oh,
where
great.
the knowledge I am I, distinct from the universe, kind of emerges.
Oh, wow.
So you have this interplay between these two centers,
Yeah.
the solar plexus connecting us to this larger energy flow,
Right.
and the lumbar ganglion asserting our separateness and individuality.
It's like he's saying that our sense of self is much more embodied,
Exactly.
much more connected to the physical sensations and energy flows within us.
And this is where it gets even more interesting because he connects these centers to our parents.
Oh, boy.
Specifically to something that he calls the parent nuclei.
Hold on. Are we talking about actual physical structures within our bodies that are linked to our parents?
That's what he's suggesting.
Wow.
He describes these parent nuclei as providing this kind of blood connection within families. This energetic link that ties us to our lineage.
Wow.
He even goes so far as to say that the Holy Ghost, that spark of individual consciousness, is created through the fusion of these parent nuclei.
So he's essentially saying that our very being, our unique individuality, is shaped by this energetic inheritance from our parents.
That's one way to interpret it, and this leads us to his view of the family as this network of interconnected wireless stations.
Okay.
Constantly exchanging these vitalistic communications.
Okay, now let's try to make this concrete for our listeners because it's starting to sound pretty abstract here.
Sure, sure.
What does this vitalistic communication actually look like in a family setting?
Well, think about the way that a baby just instinctively reaches for its mother.
Right.
The way a child seeks comfort and reassurance from its parents.
Right.
Lawrence is suggesting that there's something more going on beneath the surface.
Okay.
A flow of energy that's shaping the child's development and sense of self.
And it's not just about the mother-child bond. Yeah.
Right. He emphasizes this crucial role of the father,
Right.
Even if he's not physically present all the time.
Okay.
He argues that the father provides this kind of vital nourishment to the child.
Okay.
Even if it's less demonstrably affectionate than the mother's care.
Right.
It's like this subtle magnetic force that helps the child establish a sense of boundaries and individuality.
So what happens if that fatherly connection is missing?
Well, he suggests that it can lead to a sense of incompleteness or imbalance in the child's development.
Okay.
It's like a vital circuit hasn't been fully activated.
It's interesting because he's not necessarily talking about fathers as traditional authority figures.
No.
It's more about this energetic presence.
Right.
This grounding force.
Exactly. And this takes us back to his critique of Freud.
Right.
He's offering a much more nuanced view of family dynamics.
Right.
One that recognizes the complex interplay of these energies and influences between parents and children.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
We have, but I think we've laid a good foundation for understanding his alternative perspective on consciousness and motivation.
In the next part, we'll delve a little deeper into Lawrence's concept of the upper plane.
Yeah.
And explore those other nerve centers that he talks about. The cardiac plexus and the thoracic ganglion.
Sounds good. Stay tuned.
So we've been exploring Lawrence's concept of this lower plane, right? Those primal centers of consciousness.
Right, in the solar plexus and the lumbar ganglion and all that.
Yeah, but he doesn't stop there.
Oh, no.
He introduces this whole other idea of an upper plane.
Okay.
Where different energies and motivations come into play.
So it's like we're leveling up in terms of consciousness.
Right.
Okay, so what exactly is going on in this upper plane?
Well, he suggests that the upper plane is associated with a shift outward.
Okay.
A movement away from the self-absorption of those lower centers.
It's where we begin to recognize you are you, as distinct from I am I.
That sounds like a pretty significant shift.
It is.
Does he explain how this happens?
Well, he uses this example of a child interacting with its mother.
Okay.
Initially, the infant is completely absorbed in its own needs,
Right.
focused on getting nourishment and comfort.
Right.
But as the child develops, it starts to kind of pull away a little bit to observe the mother with this new kind of curiosity.
It's that stage where babies start just staring intently at their mothers.
Exactly.
Almost as if they're studying them.
Yeah, and he describes this look as scrutinizing, even hateful in a sense, because it challenges the mother's sense of complete unity with the child.
It's interesting because it really challenges this romanticized notion of the mother-child bond as always blissful and harmonious.
Yeah, it suggests that there's this natural push and pull between connection and separation, this need for both merging and individuation.
And he attributes this shift outward to the influence of the thoracic ganglion,
Right.
which he describes as the center of volition and power on this upper plane.
It's like the child is asserting its independence, its own unique perspective on the world.
This plays out in other behaviors as well.
Yeah.
Remember how he contrasted the child who smashes things
Right.
with the child who deliberately drops things out of sight?
Exactly.
He said the smashing was driven by that raw energy of the lower centers.
Yeah, like a tantrum.
Right.
While the dropping was a more intentional act associated with the upper plane.
The child who drops things is engaging in a kind of experiment.
Right. Testing the boundaries of their world.
It makes me think about how fascinated young children are with the concept of object permanence.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they love to play peekaboo and drop things from their high chairs.
Ah, it's like they're discovering the laws of physics all over again.
Right. And Lawrence might say they're also engaging in their own form of subjective science.
Exactly. Exploring the world through direct experience and observation.
This connects back to his idea of that lost pagan science, doesn't it?
It does.
The idea that we all have this innate capacity to understand the interconnectedness of life.
Right.
To perceive those energy flows that connect us to each other and to the universe.
And that this capacity can manifest in many different ways.
Right.
From a child's playful explorations to an artist's creative expressions to a scientist's quest for knowledge.
So it's not just about babies dropping toys. He's talking about a fundamental human impulse to make sense of the world.
Right, to find our place within this larger scheme of things.
And he argues that this impulse is just as powerful as the drive for food or sex.
Yeah.
Even if it's often overlooked or undervalued.
Especially in today's world.
Right. Okay, so we've got this upper plane with its emphasis on volition, outward focus, and this more nuanced understanding of the other.
Yeah.
What else is happening up there?
Well, he introduces another really key center on the upper plane,
Okay.
the cardiac plexus, which he associates with love and wonder.
Hold on, so the heart is involved now. It's like we're moving from the gut to the chest.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of where our consciousness is centered.
He contrasts the cardiac plexus with the solar plexus,
Okay.
suggesting that while the solar plexus is focused on the self, the cardiac plexus is oriented towards the other.
So while the solar plexus might say, I am I,
Right.
the cardiac plexus is saying, you are you.
Exactly. Acknowledging something outside of ourselves.
And even uses those beautiful Northern Renaissance paintings
Oh, yeah.
of the Madonna and Child as this visual representation of this outward flowing love and wonder.
Yeah, there's this real tenderness and a
Wow.
sense of awe in those images that I think really does seem to emanate from the heart.
And Lawrence suggests that this capacity for love and wonder is essential to our human experience.
It is.
It allows us to connect with others on a deeper level,
Yeah.
to appreciate beauty, to feel a sense of belonging. So if the thoracic ganglion gives us volition,
Yeah.
and the cardiac plexus gives us love and wonder,
Right.
how do these two centers interact?
That's a great question. I mean, he doesn't explicitly map out the relationship between them, but I think we can infer that they work in tandem to shape our interactions with the world.
So it's not just about asserting our will or blindly following our emotions.
Right.
It's about finding a balance between those two impulses.
Right. Between acting on our desires
Yeah.
and responding with empathy and compassion.
This brings us back to this larger question of how Lawrence's model of consciousness
Right.
can inform our understanding of ourselves and our relationships.
Exactly.
You know, as we're talking about this, I'm struck by how often we reduce human behavior to these simple explanations.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about biology, or it's all about upbringing, or it's all about societal pressures.
It's all nature versus nurture.
Right. But Lawrence is suggesting something much more complex and multifaceted.
He's reminding us that we're not just machines driven by instincts.
Right.
Or products of our environment.
Yeah.
You know, we are beings with multiple centers of consciousness,
Yeah.
each with its own way of perceiving and interacting with the world.
It's like he's giving us this new map of our inner landscape
Yeah.
with all its different terrains and energy flows.
And inviting us to explore it.
Right.
To become more attuned to the subtle interplay of forces within ourselves and our relationships.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Oh.
We've explored the lower plane. We've explored the upper plane.
Right.
But I have a feeling there's more to his model.
There is. In the next part, we'll kind of delve into how these different planes of being interact with each other and how they shape our experience of the world.
Okay, so let's go back to something we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
Lawrence's critique of Freudian psychoanalysis.
Right.
Because he really went there.
He did, and I think it's worth exploring a little bit further because it really sheds light on how he envisioned those complex dynamics that happen within families.
He was particularly critical of Freud's emphasis on the Oedipal complex, right?
Yes. He felt that focusing solely on sexual desire as this root of family tensions was too simplistic, too reductive. He believed it overlooked those profound energetic connections that exist between parents and children.
Yeah.
And particularly the often unsung role of the father.
I remember him saying that the father, even when physically absent, provides this kind of vital energy to the child.
Exactly, almost like a magnetic force.
Yeah, and he argued that this paternal energy is essential for the child's development,
It is.
helping them to establish a sense of self and boundaries.
Right. It's like this grounding force that complements the mother's more nurturing energy.
So it's not just about the father as this traditional authority figure.
No.
It's about this more subtle, energetic presence that influences the child's growth.
And he suggests that when this connection is lacking, it can create a sense of incompleteness or imbalance in the child's development, like a vital circuit has been left open.
And what I find really interesting is that he's not just talking about fathers and sons here.
No.
He suggests that this paternal energy is crucial for daughters as well.
Absolutely.
Helping them to develop a sense of independence and self-worth.
It all goes back to that idea that we have these multiple centers of consciousness, each with its own unique function and way of interacting with the world.
It's almost as if he's urging us to move beyond this purely intellectual understanding of ourselves. And tune into the wisdom of our bodies.
The intelligence of the solar plexus, the heart, the gut.
Right. It's not just about thinking about it. It's about feeling it, experiencing it on a deeper level.
A more embodied level,
This makes me think about how often we try to compartmentalize our lives. Separating our thoughts from our emotions, our physical selves from our spiritual self.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But Lawrence is suggesting this more holistic approach.
He is.
One that recognizes the interconnectedness of all these aspects of our being.
Right, and I think that's really the key to unlocking our full potential as human beings.
It's a tall order.
It is.
But it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
So we've been on this whirlwind tour through the mind of D.H. Lawrence.
We have.
I'm curious, what are your final takeaways for our listener today?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that we are far more complex than we often realize. We're not just driven by simple urges or defined by our past experiences. We have within us the potential for both connection and separation. For love and will, for instinct and conscious choice.
It's almost as if he's giving us permission to embrace the full spectrum of our humanity.
Yeah, with all its contradictions and complexities.
Right, and he's encouraging us to become more aware of those subtle energies at play within ourselves and in our relationship.
Absolutely. Tuning into the wisdom of our bodies, listening to the whispers of our intuition, recognizing that interconnectedness of all things.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into D.H. Lawrence.
Okay.
A huge thanks to you for guiding us through this labyrinthine world.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep diving deep.
Yes, that's right.
Until next time, stay curious.